I'm joined today by Chris Marston. Chris, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi Leah, thanks. Yeah, so I've been in the earlier sector about a dozen years now. The first half of that was being a supplier into the sector, so selling to nurseries. And the second part of that has been actually helping people run nursery groups, from being MD of the small chain up to a business that had over 100 nurseries. My take on the world is very much from a profit and viability side of things. My life has been in the commercial space, so most of the areas that I look at are around what can improve the viability and profitability of the business.
Okay. So you might have already seen a couple of videos with me and Chris. We've done some shorter ones, and the topic we're going to talk today about is how small changes can increase the value of your business. Please do, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll be jumping straight on afterwards to answer them where I can. If you are watching this on a pre-record, so on one of the social media channels, again, questions in the comments and I'll respond, or you are always welcome to reach out to either of us directly, of course. So Chris, I mean, I think one of the key things, let's first say, you know, people, when we say small changes and how it increases value, people assume we're talking cost cutting, don't they? But it can be so much more.
They do, absolutely. So, I go at it in three areas, as you rightly said: revenue, cost, and then the structure of the business. First one, in terms of revenue, small changes are making sure you've got an additional service charge or a consumer fee in your fees for those funded hours, and understanding how you can do that. There are 150 local authorities in the UK, and each one have different rules, but actually you are a private business as a nursery in most cases.
And you have to remember that.
Yeah, absolutely, and you have a right to do so. But it is a lever that can increase your revenue without touching your fees.
And do you think, I think when I speak to a lot of owners, they're scared about making those changes if they're not already in place, because they feel like it's quite hard to justify an increase. It feels like, you know, everyone's being squeezed, and then they're asking for their little bit more as well. What if the parents don't like it? So how would you manage that?
Okay, this is about communication.
Yeah.
Clarity and communication, and leading parents on a journey of understanding. And it doesn't need to be a huge sum either. However, you know, per child, per week on every funded hour can build up. And the great thing is it's pure profit to the company. Which you know, you're not having to spend anything to do.
It's covering costs you're already meeting.
You're already spending. Yeah, absolutely. But clarity with communication tends to lead the parents to a place where you can do it. But also with the local authority, make sure you understand it, what they want, and make sure they understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. You have every right to do it. Yeah.
And I think, you know, for a lot of parents, while there is that concern, I think sometimes it's easier to sell a consumables charge than an increase in a day rate, because they can see something tangible that it relates to. Absolutely. Whereas to turn around and just suddenly say, well, we want an extra £5 a day for the same amount of hours, feels like, actually, you know, well, where's that money going? So it's quite easy to actually package up a consumables charge and say, well, that's what it's for.
It is, but I wouldn't say don't increase your fees.
Increase those as well, though, to be fair.
But don't do it at the same time.
No.
And increasing fees, in terms of, you know, going back to the original question of how can you increase your value, is making sure your proposition stands up in the geography you're in. It's very easy to say, look at the big players and say they're charging this, so therefore I'm going to charge just as much. You may charge less than that because your overhead may be less. And then it's your decision to decide, do I have a full nursery at a lower rate per day, or an empty or a half full nursery at a very high rate? And those are decisions you have to make as an owner. But in terms of value, I would come back to the point of making sure everything is clear and consistent and credible.
I think, you know, it's very easy to say, well, I'll keep it cheap. I'll just keep it cheap. I'm the cheapest in the area. And actually, you know, firstly, it means you're scraping by. It means you have to be running at those high occupancies. You have to basically having your staff costs, you know, barely keeping them within ratio just to make sure you're still making some money. And you're making life harder for yourself when, as you say, you know, you can actually offset that and say, we're going to charge a little bit more. But accept the fact that maybe we're going to have two less FTEs. fine, we can live with that. Don't undervalue yourself as well. We're providing a fantastic service and you deserve to be paid. You are running a business and you deserve to be paid. Don't undervalue yourself by putting your fees too low or being scared to put them up. Most parents expect a fee increase once a year now. That's how it is. So actually when you say, oh, well, I haven't increased my fees in 4 years, you're not doing yourself any justice at all.
If you haven't increased them in 4 years, you've probably gone bust.
Yeah, you're probably not with us anymore, to be fair.
Yeah. To tell you that. But other areas you can increase your value or improve your value, as it were, and value doesn't have to be
monetary.
Pound notes.
Yeah.
Can be making sure your supplier contracts are fit for purpose, making sure your systems within the business are clear, making sure your employees have the right job roles, making sure you've got financial advantage and decent relationships with your suppliers. And those little bits, if you've got your house in order, then it makes it much better and much the value of your business is far more obvious than if you're getting someone who's got to pick through the bones to find the value. If they can see its value, then you know it's far. I'm not going to say quite straightforward. It is more straightforward.
More straightforward, certainly.
Absolutely.
More straightforward. And that's, I mean, from my point of view, obviously, I come at this from the valuer's point of view. And when I'm looking at people's costs and expenses, we look at things like purchases. You know, there's purchases. It's very much considered a cost of sale. So you know, when you're looking to finally sell your business, a buyer would look at that figure and say, right, well, this is what you're bringing in. All these kids need to be fed, this is what you're spending, that must therefore be the cost that I have to spend to maintain this level of income. So it doesn't take into account the fact that actually you've just got incredibly extravagant tastes. It doesn't take into account that actually, you know, you've been buying tons of new equipment and putting it through for the last year. It just says that's the cost. And then that automatically decreases your value because they're going to assume that's a cost that's got to go on year and year. Yeah. Whereas if you can kind of get yourself a nice budget, ideally you want to be applying a cost per child for your food and your consumables
right
and everything. You know, and if you can get that and stick to it and see that year on year, then a buyer can look at this and go, yeah, do you know what, this is organised, it's efficient, I can see where the costs are, I can kind of see how the budget is working, so I can automatically see if I increase the numbers, this is where I should be looking to spend. Perfect. And you're not having to say, well, yeah, but I'm worth more, because you shouldn't really be paying attention to that number. Your buyer doesn't know that, they can't take that assumption, so you have to make it for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's also ways of benchmarking your spend, which is a relatively new thing in the market, is knowing what is the nursery over the hill spending on food per child. What are they spending on waste? What are they spending on their other utilities? Those figures are available if you go looking for them.
You have to dig them out. They're not easily at the moment, but you're seeing more of them, and you get people talking about them as well.
Got a good grip of them.
I bet you do.
I certainly do. So that's perfectly obvious to be able to do. Yeah,
and I think, you know, things like benchmarking figures, it becomes a bit of a, oh well, I should be spending 50 to 55% on my staff. Now, the thing is, benchmark is just purely that. It's an average. There's higher, there's lower. It needs to be right for your business. But part of benchmarking isn't saying, I must be spending this. It's saying, right, if I'm not going to spend this, if I am going to be a little bit higher, why do I feel that's justified?
Absolutely.
You don't have to make yourself fit in, but you do need to kind of understand those numbers and understand why actually the additional cost of those staff, for example, is worthwhile in the overall business. Yeah, okay. So how about things like small changes to, you know, everyday systems, like how you manage your staff, for example?
So staffing, really good one. So we're now in the world, our digital world, and there are many options of nursery management software out there. I wouldn't say one is perfect at all. However, all are much better than an Excel spreadsheet and someone thinking they've got X or Y in the room, so that they can balance occupancy and your staff rota.
So do you think basically it's not really possible to run a nursery nowadays without some kind of system?
I think the systems pay for themselves.
They do, yeah. They
without
do.
a doubt, even though the capital cost you make, gosh, that's another X pounds per month. However, parent interaction, parents love it. And reporting, now many of them are getting much better at reporting.
Oh, so much better.
So helping them run your business for you can be a cost saving inside, but can also make you more efficient, especially on staff rostering.
No, absolutely.
Knowing where those staff are, when the children are coming in, and what is supposed to be in the room, and then what in reality is in the room, and you can see quite quickly whether you're overstaffed or understaffed, according to the nursery management system. But there isn't the best one.
No.
Everyone has an opinion, and funnily enough, if a nursery group is using that one, they say that's the best one.
Of course they do.
Because they've committed to it and have to use it. But there's a big change. Many people get nervous about changing their nursery management software. It's a difficult one, but actually the benefit is there, and it is worth the investment of your time and effort.
And one thing I would add is these systems are also only as good as much as you use them, as much as you input them. You know, really, really utilise them, because there's so many systems. I wouldn't say I've seen a single business, not just nurseries, but businesses that have these sort of systems that use them in their entirety. You know, there's always something that they're still, we're still using a spreadsheet for that. But why? This can do it for you. It's worth the setup time to get all that in place, because as Chris says, it will save you so much time and energy along the way. And when we talk about, you know, cost saving and adding value, that's also your time and energy. You know, that has a value, that has a cost. And if you put in your brain into trying to do that spreadsheet, when actually this system can do it all for you, invest the time there, it will save you time later, and then you can do something else with your time. Consolidation
as well of those systems. Whether it's a recruitment system, whether it's a customer, an inquiry system. Many of the systems out there now can bolster all of those together. So you're not using 3 or 4 different CRM systems and going, oh, our data is here or our data's there, get it into one place. My recommendation, I'm not a data geek, but I can see the benefits massively. And most importantly, the people using it, the people using the system benefit more if it's the same system.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So with staffing, you know, if you are saying, right, well, I've got my system, it's telling me that Mondays and Fridays I've got way too many staff. My spend on staff is 63%. What are the actual steps you can take then?
Wow.
So how do you manage that bit?
So Mondays and Fridays are the great
post-COVID problem areas.
The great problem area. I mean, the number one thing is packaging the hours you offer. So new parents, don't leave existing parents as they are for the time being, but any new parent that comes in is stipulating they have to buy a Monday or a Friday with whatever other hours they would like. There's nothing wrong with you doing that. You're allowed to. You're allowed to. It's your inventory, it's your business. As long as you're fulfilling the fully free funded places elsewhere, you can say you can have a Wednesday, but you've got to have a Monday as well. It's unlikely you're going to be offering a Wednesday, because you've probably got a waiting list anyway in many areas. And I'll come on to waiting lists a bit in a minute, because there's a really something I've just remembered there. That's an interesting point. But package up your inventory and sell it as you want to sell it. Stop selling exactly what the parent wants, but start selling what your business wants, which means you can deploy your staff in a more efficient and effective way, and not have this massive peak. Any business that has a peak is working to flatten it, because you can't resource it. You know, telling a member of staff you've got to work X, Y and Z days, but we've got no work for you on a Monday. That's not really very useful in this day and age. And also it's making a massive assumption as to what the parents actually want. Because in most cases, when they come in and go, I want Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you say, well, I can only give you Monday, Thursday, Friday, they're going to go, okay, I'll move my hours around at work, it's not a problem. You know, don't make those assumptions on their behalf. Absolutely. But also, I mean, I know families who will buy a Friday because they want the spaces earlier in the week. They never turn up on a Friday, but they are prepared to stomach that. Okay, they are obviously from your more affluent criteria, as it were, but they are prepared to do it because they need those places in the nursery, which is really, really important. And you mentioned waiting lists there. So waiting lists. I go into a lot of nurseries and they say, oh, we're full, we've got a waiting list. Is that waiting list monetised? Is there any monetary value in that waiting list? There should be, because I know nurseries that go and say, oh no, we've got a waiting list, it's 30 strong, and then 6 months later it's going, oh well, they've all gone somewhere else. They've gone somewhere else, Especially now you've got funding for babies. We're going to find those baby rooms growing to accommodate the opportunity, because if you don't get the baby as a baby,
You're not going to have them for the whole run. Yeah.
They're gone. But making sure there is a financial commitment to that waiting list that can be given back on the first month of invoice, for example, is quite straightforward.
Yeah.
But if there's no financial commitment other than a registration fee, and I'm not counting that, I'm talking about to get on the waiting list, a deposit if you like, then parents, they'll be, as
on
a
every
nursery
waiting
down
list.
the road, even though they're going to say, oh yes, put us on the waiting list, it's a very easy thing to say.
Yeah.
Commit to and I'm not talking about £10 or £15 here. I'm talking 100, 200, 300. I even know of £400 to go on my waiting list, and you will get that deducted from your first month's invoice.
Yeah.
But it gives you and your team the knowledge of we've got that revenue in house. They're coming to us.
Yeah. We can guarantee they're definitely starting.
You're not going to pay a £400 deposit at two places.
No. No, excellent point. Okay. And then, I mean, we talked about, staffing, reducing staffing, everything like that, and how you manage that. But how about kind of small changes you can make within your staff structure almost to help kind of add value?
So adding value again within new staff structure is about clarity of role and responsibility. There are many nurseries that, no, it's her responsibility, it's his responsibility, and everyone goes around, and at the end of the day, no one's doing it. But to have, in any size business, a defined role and responsibility for that person you are paying a wage to, they need to know about it, but so do the rest of the business. And also it's a way of engaging with that member of staff. And employee engagement is possibly the single biggest area that is the easiest area to improve from an owner's perspective. It's about talking and communicating, because your nursery is only as good as your staff. We all know that, I'm afraid. But engaging with them on what is their role and their responsibility, and then they are accountable for that task, be it making sure feed time at 11:30 is carried out, or whether the room is clear and set up for the next day, and all those. Whose job is it? And make sure they're doing it well and empower them to do it, but also you can develop them through that as well. And a developed member of staff, again, adds value to your business. More engaged
as well, more loyal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The loyalty, and they're more productive.
Yeah.
So the roles and responsibilities in the structure of your organisation, making sure you've got the person who is the health and safety lead, making sure the person who is in charge of lunch cover, who is opening, who is closing, who is doing payroll, who is accountable for that, making sure that is really, really clear, then you're going to be in a much better position than it's a spaghetti junction of, well, everyone does a bit of everything.
And it's about giving them that accountability, but making sure they embrace that accountability as well. Absolutely. It's all well saying you're responsible for this, but if they don't embrace it themselves, then it doesn't mean anything.
No. But they also need to be led and coached in order to do it, because in a small nursery setting, most of the staff are doing all sorts of things. There are multiple tasks.
Lots of hats.
But they need lead. You need to have a lead on the responsibility of who that is and how it's done. But engagement, leading them and coaching them will keep everyone together and get the tasks done.
Yeah. And I think, this, obviously not everything is about the monetary value, but if I put my broker's hat back on again, one of the biggest things, especially with single settings or where you have a very involved owner who's in setting every day, is that often this becomes a real problem actually when you want to then exit the business, because it's all kind of tied around you. And actually often what you get in a situation there is that you are the point of accountability. All roads lead to you, and as a result almost everyone else gets to shrug that accountability off because everything comes back to you anyway. When you're looking to exit, it's about actually how can you exit, get the value for the business and make sure you can walk away. And that needs to be planned in advance. And it's about kind of putting these structures in place to make sure that actually the value is there without you as well. And that's a very, very key thing.
Massive.
Yeah.
So during some acquisitions that I've been part of, the owner has been, as you've described, the owner walks out the door and the business just goes down the tubes, as it were. And all the manager and the room, they all sit there and go, well, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to do it.
We don't know how she did that.
And the commercial due diligence of it showed everything was okay and the revenues were okay, etc., etc., etc. So good enough for them to buy, but the actual value was the owner.
Yeah.
And could have been an earn out, a longer earn out, or whatever the case may be. But the decision making authority went, and the business failed to meet the expectation very, very quickly.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, and also so much of your value is tied up in the goodwill, and now you've got staff who have been left, weren't empowered to do the job and to make the decisions and take accountability, who now have a new owner saying, well, you have to, because the only way this business is going to survive is if you step up. And then the staff go as well. And that's why buyers won't pay top money for settings that are kind of built that way.
And I'd add in parent PR.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah.
The customers, don't forget the customers. If you, as a new owner, aren't engaging with the customers, whether you're new owner or existing owner, or just how to increase the value of your business, the engagement with your parents who are paying those fees has to be much better than it's ever been before, because there's more competition as well, and you get people who are naturally really, really good at it and people who have to work at it.
Yeah.
But you need to make sure, if the manager changes, for example, that those parents are brick-walled into your nursery. They are not going, oh, we're following the manager down the road, which can also happen.
Yeah, and again, something buyers will actively look to avoid, in tying people in and things like that. So it's definitely worth having to think about. So I mean, if we go back to monetary costs, then suppliers and kind of picking your suppliers, you kind of mentioned about contracts and things like that. So is there kind of particular suppliers I'm not asking for specifics, but maybe suppliers you might try to avoid, or particular shopping practices you might try to avoid?
So when you've got your procurement hat on, and even as a single setting, you are procurement, you are buying stuff that comes in to run your business. Make sure you've got a relationship with the sellers.
Yeah.
Look at the best value you can get, not necessarily the best cost, because there is the buy cheap, buy twice scenario, as it were, which we'll come back to in a minute. There are many, many suppliers now who are, I call them grown-up suppliers, who have grown-up online purchasing opportunities where you can lock down their offering, as it were, to come into your setting. You can have what's called a core list. You can have discount rebates if you hit a certain spend level. But you can also look at the service that they provide, and there are some, service levels, delivery times have become fantastic since COVID. No question. And there are some out there who still struggle, but there are some where their customer service is fantastic. Absolutely. And a lot of the time, moving supplier, which is where I came from, the supply side, is what problem am I actually solving by moving my supplier? And there could be a few pennies here or a few pennies there, but if you generate that relationship, cost, I think, is pretty even now. Yeah. It's about that relationship and that service.
The added value almost from that relationship.
And how hard are you going to work for me when something goes wrong?
Yeah.
And that is, as a supplier, a question I would always ask them now. I don't want them annoying me or annoying the staff, etc. But knowing that they're there to help.
If I pick up the phone, will you answer?
Yeah. Will you answer the phone? Is it a real person? And is it seamless? There are people I would avoid, and those are the people who don't have an audited business.
Yeah.
Their supply chain isn't audited. Is it being manufactured by unsustainable resources somewhere? And is that human resource in the Far East that's not audited?
Yeah.
It does still happen. And also, there is a favourite shopping brand in the UK, worldwide, that is cheaper, faster, quicker than everybody else. And it gets here and a white van comes and delivers it to your door. I would avoid them like the plague.
You don't know what you're getting.
You are inviting risk into your business. There's no customer service. There's no kite mark on many of the products. And most of, let's talk of toys or learning resources that they provide are not for commercial use. They're not for a business. They're for domestic purpose, for, a 3-year-old using it for 1 hour a day, 3 times a week, not 15 3-year-olds 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
And you're going to buy it cheap. You're going to think it's marvellous. It's broken, and immediately you're buying it again.
Yeah.
but also the choke test. Massive health and safety issue, massive risk issue. You've got enough risk in your business just from a child coming in.
Yeah.
Don't bring in supplies that you can't verify
Yeah.
that have been through that.
No. Excellent advice, because again the very obvious cost saving, and let's face it, half the time that cost saving isn't actually there, but the very obvious cost saving may cost you so much more further down the line. And I mean, on a separate note to this, I would also say, you know, I see a lot of business where that certain supplier, let's say, there's a situation within the setting where everyone's got access to the account, so everything is just ordered as and when it's needed, and that is petrifying, because, you know, people get to the end of the month and only then realise what they've been spending on consumables, you know, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the budgets and everything like that. You've got to manage it, but also your staff and the people who have the accountability, who are allowed to order, also need to be aware of their budgets. This is not willy-nilly, you know, and actually if it is a case that everyone has access, you're never going to control it. You need to tighten the reins a little bit and have someone take accountability for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Systems and processes, and also going back to the suppliers that invest in being in front of us, the early years sector, as it were, are the ones who you should be talking to.
Yeah.
And we can all list them. They go from Community Play to Millhouse, Hope Education, Gompels, Cozy, Ministry of Education, and smaller.
You feel like you're going to have to name all of them now.
I do, and I'm desperate. And I apologise if I haven't, but
A BBC moment, other suppliers are available.
other suppliers are available, and they sell different products as well.
Yeah.
And a really key piece on product choice here is making sure the person delivering the learning has an input into the resources, rather than just the owner-manager who learnt this at college 10 years ago.
Yeah.
This was a great thing, because the world is moving really,
Yeah.
really fast, and your deliverer of your learning may be more up to speed with what is needed to deliver your curriculum in a really, really good and effective way.
Yeah.
So make sure they're included in the choice of product, which may mean your supplier isn't the one you thought you were going to use.
Yeah, and talk about that as well. You know, at the end of the day, day nurseries, early years, it's quite a large sector, but it is still quite a local one. You know, it is very insular. We all kind of know each other and everything like that. If you can use people within the sector, that's great. You know, we all benefit. We're trying to build a community and support each other as much as possible. And if you can use people in the sector, because as Chris says, cost-wise, most of these are flat now. Actually, then please do so, because, you know, it can only help all of us. It's only when, much like, you know, high street small bookshops, it's only once they're gone that you realise that actually it was nice to have that option.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will mention IKEA as well on the budget.
Oh, IKEA's brilliant, absolutely.
People come up to me and say, why not IKEA? If it suits your need and your budget, fine. It won't last as long as some of the other stuff, but it is there and it is an option to do so.
And again, it's a reputable company, so you know that everything is sourced and looked after. And
I'm not aware of.
I'm pretty sure,
and I'm not aware of their credentials completely.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure IKEA haven't been cancelled yet, so I think we're okay.
Others are available.
Others are available. So, I mean, we talked about, you know, larger structures, staff, you know, all that sort of stuff. Quick and easy, you know, if you had to give one cost-saving tip to someone who owns a day nursery, one thing, and it could be as simple as you're going to charge an extra consumable, but you've already done that one. What would you say? Put you on the spot.
I'd say budget.
Budget.
If you budget and know what you're supposed to be investing, and you've got visibility of your spend, you will save money.
Yeah. It's a well-known thing. You manage what you monitor. So you know, even if it is that you end up going in budget, you're knowingly going over budget, and you can kind of reason why. But you have to monitor it. You have to budget.
But your biggest cost is your staff, and it's understanding where those staff are, when they're there. Are they signing in? Are they signing out? Are your shoulder periods, as in your 7:30 in the morning, your 6 o'clock at night? There are normally too many staff in the building at that stage, because the children have started to go, and the staff need to be winding down the same. And if you can save 15 minutes of salary at the end of the day and 15 minutes at the beginning of the day, that adds up to a really, really big figure across a year. And so understanding that suits your need when the staff come in, not necessarily the staff's need all the time, or because it's a legacy piece. I've always come in at 7:30, so I'll keep coming in. We don't actually need you till 8 o'clock. You've got to be prepared to have that conversation, but again in the right way and the grown-up way.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things I find a lot is when I go out to nurseries and see what the staff costs are, and obviously we bandy about the benchmarking figures of 50 to 55%, but actually in reality that varies greatly. You know, I think my record was something like 85%, which...
We're bust.
Yeah, they weren't making any money, let's make that very, very clear. But, you know, depending on the demographic, the day rates, it will vary, and it will vary. But if I say to people, your staff costs are too high, you know, and there's almost a gut reaction of, you want me to fire my staff? No, God, no, don't do that. Never do that. That's ridiculous. But it's about being aware of it. And he may be sort of saying, okay, well, they're too high now. What I need to do is, as people leave, I know so-and-so's leaving at the end of that month. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to just automatically replace like for like. I'm going to put more thought into when I need the cover and what I actually need to cover. You know, it's about a really kind of looking at, again, on the granular level. It's not just a case of saying, that's it, we're going to slash costs. And I think for a lot of people, their staff costs have crept up in the last 4 years, because for a lot of people the response to the fact we were all having trouble recruiting was really to throw people at it. If you had bodies, you did not let them leave the business. You found a way to keep them there. But actually your business has changed. The situation has changed. You need to make those changes as well, because actually you're not still staffing for 3 years ago when you were really worried that you weren't going to have enough people and you were going to have to close rooms. It's different circumstance now, and it can be managed differently as well.
And I would also add to that, it's about the deployment.
Yeah.
Figures are too high not because of the total number of staff you've got, it's the deployment within a room at a certain time. And your figures are 50 to 55. I would say a decent nursery is run in the 40s.
Yeah, they're out there.
If it's below 40, it's probably understaffed,
a little bit tight, yeah.
under-ratioed. But anything over 55, you've got some problems.
Yeah.
But again, there isn't the average, because every building has a different layout. Small rooms are going to be higher, bigger rooms are going to be less.
Larger preschool, more babies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm aware of nurseries at the moment who are only running at 65% occupancy because they haven't got enough staff.
Yeah, and they've capped it for that reason.
Yeah, and they've capped it for that reason. But they're still managing to be profitable at that. But it's just changing their business model as well. You know, the number of staff, don't think you've got to get rid of staff. Deploy them in a different way or use them for something else. Yeah. Or in a different room, or in fact, if you're expanding and can expand, then so be it. But obviously, space restrictions, etc. Yeah.
I think, you know, it just always comes back down to when we talk about changes you can make to increase value. This isn't about a monetary slash those costs, get rid of those staff, you know, run everything really, really lean for the few years before sale to maximise your value when you go there. It's about actually, often the bottom line is more affected by operational changes, and if that staff figure especially is showing as being way off base, it's not an indication that you have too many staff, it's an indication that there's other problems operationally that need to be adjusted to maximise that value.
And if you run it too lean, your proposition, your product is going to go down.
Yeah.
And therefore you're going to have less parents wanting it. Your quality will go down. You'll have Ofsted knocking on the door. You'll have staff leaving because they're too stretched. Absolutely, and that's been a key thing over the last 18 months, is staff under too much pressure. And then you get the old, well, we ought to train our staff, but that means you've got to take them out of numbers. But I can't cover that, so therefore my staff don't get developed, and then you get the criteria, or the situation of, if I don't develop them, you know, they'll leave, but if you do develop them, etc. So staffing is the biggest figure you've got to play with, and it needs the most time. And some people just, well, this is how we did it last year, so we'll carry on doing it. It needs to be under constant review, and unless you've got a decent nursery management system in there telling you what's going on and supporting your decision making, then you're going to struggle.
Yeah, unfortunately, the days of rotas on bits of paper, you know, and you sort of say people using spreadsheets, lots of people out there, you know, still kind of everything's done on paper, there's no spreadsheets, it's all very basic, you know, you're making your life harder. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is actually it feels like taking on a new system or making these changes is such a massive task. And when you're insetting every day and running around like a lunatic and putting out fires and so-and-so's called in sick, and at some point I'd quite like to go home and see my family, it feels like this massive undertaking to kind of put these things in place. But for most of these things, it's going to be a one-off investment of time. And probably, you know, the investment of time is probably harder to justify than the investment of cost if there is a cost involved. But it's just going to be that once. And then hopefully your systems are going to be in place that you won't ever have to invest like that again. You're never going to have that time where it all goes wrong and you have to almost start from scratch. That won't, hopefully, won't happen again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think we've kind of covered everything. I mean, obviously, please, as I say, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the comments. I'm going to jump on straight away and answer them for you now. And obviously, you can reach out to myself and Chris directly if we can help in any way or have any questions. And hopefully, we'll see you for the next webinar and have a lovely rest of the evening.